And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Danny Cannell. That's Bud Elliott. That's Tom Fornelli. I'm Chip Patterson. Big weekend in college football. The NFL draft. We had that instant reaction for you on Thursday night from the first round. And now we're going to break things down a little bit more. We're talking by school. We're talking by conference. What does it mean if you had the most? What does it mean if you did not have any? There is a very, very interesting list of players that went undrafted that we all thought very, very highly of in college. We'll dig into some of that and much more of our notes from the weekend. As we gather together on Friday, the news broke that Lance Leipold was going to be the hire at Kansas. Tom and I got a chance to jump in on an emergency podcast. Before we get going, Bud, Danny, any sort of thoughts or any lingering expectations that you want to make sure that we get out here for the people before we start to really advance this thing and start to learn about what the Lance Leipold experience is going to look like in Lawrence?
I think it's a great hire. I don't think you can have a whole lot of success at Kansas, but getting a guy who has won at multiple places where it's difficult to win. They could have gone and they could have tried the recruiter route, which they did when they hired, what's his name, Texas A&M.
David Beatty.
Right, David Beatty. That really didn't work. They tried to go with the name route, which there was no evidence Les Miles could do more with less, because literally he did less with more at LSU in a lot of years. Not like, no pun intended there, but I guess it works. Getting a guy who has had success at very difficult places to win, who's going to come in with a system, who doesn't depend on having really top players for him, that he's going to recruit specifically to a system. You're kind of doing what Kansas State has done when Kansas State has had success, right? And trying to do that, maybe not as much the JUCO stuff. I think it's a solid hire. I was very intrigued by Monken, but it's just so hard as an AD to tell your fans, hey, we're not really going to play for titles. We're just trying to make bowls, which would be an amazing accomplishment at Kansas.
I think it's a home run hire. I think it's as good as they could have done, considering all the circumstances that you take in. The fact that you could get somebody who was in the conversation for several, top tier jobs at the Power 5 level, and you could lure him away to Kansas after spring football has already occurred, after you just, changed over athletic director, and you're the worst team in the Power 5. It's a home run hire. It's close as you can get there.
Is it too easy when we start to get to our preseason predictions, which will be in July? Hey, which is in 2 months, fellas.
Ain't that far away.
Start getting together all of our information to preview the upcoming season. Are you just going to, number one, this is maybe an easier answer. Are you just going to throw Kansas at the bottom of your projected order of finish? Just easy right in 10. And number two, when it comes for win totals and when it comes to trying to, predict how the season's going to go, do you automatically throw them on the 1-11 watch? Just because I'm thinking about this, Danny, based on what you mentioned with the timeline. Just so difficult to imagine that compared to the first hires of this coaching cycle, how much time there's been that he's still got to learn everyone's names. Tom, you mentioned that with a couple of our things. It's it's spring practice. I hope everyone wears name tags because that's going to be the number one goal of this spring practice. He does not even have that. So do you think that it will, number one, you just pencil him in at the bottom of the Big 12? Number two, do you think it will be a true year -1 situation? Or are you willing to entertain the idea that this could be a frisky 4-8 team?
I will pencil Kansas in at the bottom of the Big 12, not only for this year, but also for next year. And I will put it in pen. This is a multi-year rebuild. They had total fake success in 2019. I remember, kind of getting in some discussions with people as wait, you really think this Kansas team's going to win 4 games in 2020? Their improvement was fake. I think their win total will be 1.5.
Yeah.
I mean, almost certainly. If you put it at 1, nobody's going to bet the under. So you're going to make it at 1.5. You put it at 2, everybody takes the under because they have 1 win against South Dakota, probably 3 other games where they're not going to be huge underdogs. Everything else, they're going to be 3 or 4 scores at least.
Yeah, I've got him in last place. I don't know. I mean, If you look at when Leipold took over at Buffalo, he took over a 5-win team, and he had a 5-win team in his first year, and then he went down to 2-10 before like the build really started. And I think that if he's approaching this job correctly, I don't think that the first thing should be, all right, we got to win as many games as possible this year. I think that this is just, I don't know if it's a negative year one or just a year zero, whatever you want to call it. I think that the 2021 season for him is going to be figuring out, the situation. It's like, yeah, I've got a football team, I've got a coach, and we're going to go play the games. It's not like they're going to, tank the season or anything, but I don't think the overall focus is going to be on results in 2021 as much as it's going to be getting the process started.
Creating a new culture. Like this is a new start. I'll be curious. I'll be tempted if it's 1.5 to take the over. Yeah. I'm looking on the bright side here. Here's why. We have a little bit of a template for what Lance Leipold will be given, because we had a lot of coaches last year. First-year coaches didn't have spring ball. They did have more meetings, but you can cram somewhat. I'll have to see what the win total is first. I mean, they're definitely last in the Big 12. I thought the win total thing was a more interesting conversation. Like they're 0-2 against here? Coastal. I need to see so what would you put it at? 1.5? And you see,
I'll make it. I would put it at 1.5.
I'll go over.
I think everybody.
I'll go over.
And listen, if we talk about Leipold,
do we have any undertakers?
I mean, let's go through this game
but
by
Bud,
game.
You're on the under, right?
I just set the line. I don't want. If you gave me 2, I would take the under.
Right.
I would go under 2. You want to go over 2?
No, I like the 1.5. I would take the over, because I do think it might be like, it could be a time to buy. Like I think Lance Leipold is the right guy for this one. And if you can buy extremely low at extreme discount, and I think 1.5 would be a discounted price, but I could see a lot of people penciling it. Oh, they're going to be 0 for 12. They're not going to win a game. But I think like Sam Pittman last year had a upside surprise, and they were a castaway team. But I thought Sam Pittman was a good coach, would fit the culture, and they get their first SEC win in 20 tries or whatever it was. So I could see a similar scenario unfold with Leipold. But man, that roster is so bare.
Before this evolves into yet another Kansas football podcast episode, I just they play South Dakota to open the year. We can't even assume that's a win.
That is a good FCS team, as I'm learning from the last couple weeks.
And Kansas has lost to these teams in recent years, and then they get at Coastal in their second game. They've lost to Coastal, I think, 2 years in a row now.
Yeah, they're 0 for 2.
Then it's Baylor, at Duke, at Iowa State, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, at Oklahoma State, Kansas State, at Texas, at TCU, West Virginia. Are you guys still so sure about the over 1.5?
The play is that if you really believe in this culture, and Tom, we talked about it in the reaction pod, that sometimes we find ourselves a little bit uneasy on how hard we are leaning in it as something that matters, but we acknowledge that there is something intangible to being able to lead and inspire and organize and have everyone focused on the similar goal, working in lockstep, and that matters. And it seems to be a big piece of why you like Lance Leipold. If I'm going to buy the culture, then yeah, there's absolutely one Big 12 opponent that is going to be a little bit looking past them or playing down or uninspired. And if you are Lance Leipold, you're circling the most winnable games on the conference schedule, and you're just going all in, because if we can get one conference win and avoid that being a little 0-9 for your year one, then that is something that I think is worth maybe considering that he'll be able to go and get you one Big 12 win. It would be awful for the team they beat, right? That would be the thing.
Texas.
It's probably going to be Steve Sarkisian in Texas if we want to actually consider what would be. It would be hilarious if Kansas's one win was against Steve Sarkisian in Texas. I'm going to go ahead and jump on the Jayhawks and the points as soon as they said it. But
I think 2021.
That's my argument.
I think 2021 for them will probably really largely depend on how much of his staff is coming with them.
We still don't know that at this point. Yeah. Okay. So another 10 minutes on the Kansas Jayhawks here in 2021. What a time to be alive. All right. NFL draft. Danny, how was it on the fantasy football draft watch party? A lot of pieces, a lot of talent. What was your overall, I guess, from that Thursday night as well, but then also just from the NFL draft as a whole. It doesn't even have to be college specific, but how'd you feel coming out of the weekend?
So this weekend is always an interesting weekend for me because I know my Twitter feed is going to start getting a little riled up because of the SEC's run in the NFL draft. So I might have like lit a fire and like just tossed the match in just a total blaze and then ran off and watched it burn because after the first round was there, the SEC had the most players drafted of any other conference and they start coming out. And I said, well, if you take out Bama, is it that impressive? It's the same as the Big Ten. Actually, the Big Ten had more in the first round. And so after the entire draft plays out again, if you take out Bama, the gap doesn't look quite as wide. And there were all kind of, then I'm just getting pelted with just all kind of bombs coming in at me. I'm trying to dodge them. So I just get out of there. And clearly, yes, if you took Ohio State out of the Big Ten, if you took Clemson out of the ACC, like the top tier teams.
If you take Pitt out of the ACC, because right. Pitt led the ACC in draft picks.
They had 6, which was really impressive. But the storyline, the mantra of the SEC is so dominant because they've had this run. I think it's a master marketing job by the SEC. Because it helps them in recruiting because they're all selling, hey, if you come to the SEC, look, we have the most players drafted every single year. It helps in the perception of them. Everybody loves to talk about it. Like when you dive into the numbers, and you guys may say you're completely off your rocker, like they have on average 15 to 20 more players drafted than next closest conference. The difference in those is probably a bunch of guys that were drafted in the 6th and 7th round. We saw kickers and long snappers drafted. Like, does that really matter that much? Is that a problem that they're dominating that much? I would say Alabama's dominance in the draft is a way bigger problem than the SEC's dominance in the draft history. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that Alabama just deserves the headline for tying the Miami class. Like right. 6 first-round picks ties Miami for the most first-round picks. 8 picks in the first 2 rounds is the most of all time. A bunch of teams had gotten up there to have 7 picks in the first 2 rounds, including Alabama, which did it in last season, 2020. LSU did it last season, 2020 with 7 in the first 2 rounds, and Alabama in 2017 all had 7, 6 times overall, but 8 players in the first 2 rounds. Like that's a little bit, that's unique. That's going to push that SEC count, which, as you mentioned, 65 players drafted in the first 259 picks. That is the most by any single conference in the common draft era. So 65, new record just set by the SEC. The previous record was the SEC, which had it with 64. So just 1 less than that. That included Josh Allen, Kentucky, not Wyoming, Josh Jacobs, DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, Quinnen Williams. And then in 2020, the SEC again had 63 picks, as did the 2013 SEC draft. I will say that this particular run where you've got 64 in 2019, 63 in 2020, then 65 here in 2021. I think that that's a little bit of an outlier, probably driven by Alabama. If Alabama's going to be setting records as a school, then those are going to be those extra 3, 4, 5 picks that are going to take the SEC over the top. I don't think that it's sustainable. I don't think the SEC will continue to keep breaking its own record year after year. And at some point, the SEC is going to, come back just a little bit, which in turn means that the gap is going to lessen. This feels like a spike that's a little bit even beyond the fact that the SEC year after year after year after year seems to be number 1 on that conference big board.
I'm not sure I buy that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's going one way.
Yeah.
You think that it's like the SEC will continue to break its own record?
Well, hello, they have way more
teams
teams than the Big 12 and the Pac-12. So that gives them an enormous advantage.
But even on a per team advantage, I mean, so
SEC is the only conference in the country this year that every school had at least 1 player drafted.
I mean, for first round picks, the last 7 drafts. So basically, since Louisville joined the ACC, SEC 73, ACC 39, Big 10 39. I mean, it's not close.
To your point, Tom, because they love running that line too. Does that mean Vanderbilt's a good team? No offense. I feel like every time we say something about Vanderbilt this year, we're gonna have to be like, sorry.
No,
They're
but
like,
it shows that like I agree. I think Alabama kind of like the results on the field carries the load. Like it is the big deal, but there's still just far more depth to that conference from a talent level, because if we look, the SEC had 65 players drafted. The Big Ten was in second with 44. If we take Alabama out of the equation, Alabama had 9 players. That's still 56 players. That's still 12 more than the next closest conference had, even without its best team. If you take Ohio State out of the Big Ten's total, they're going to fall way down the rankings in that one, because it's I don't think it's changing. I think like there were maps. I can't remember who published them, but it was just a map of where every single player that was drafted was from. And shocker, the overwhelming majority of players that were drafted this year are from the Southeast. They didn't necessarily play in the SEC, but they're from that region of the country. Florida had more than anybody, unless you're Brian Fisher and you're doctoring the results to make it look like Texas had more. But like that entire region had more players produced that went to the NFL in the draft. It's only natural that that region is where the schools are and where those players are mostly going to go. And then you combine the actual results of the conference. I don't see it changing anytime soon.
There is a way, I think, and it would be if Texas and USC and Florida State and maybe like Michigan, if they're turning more of their highly rated recruits into first rounders, that's the way you could cut into the SEC's lead by a little bit. But nobody will overtake them. Like the talent in this country is becoming more concentrated on the Southeast, not less. We have less talent in California than we used to have. We have less talent in the Northeast and the Midwest than we used to have. Like
so you think it's like that's
the trend is exactly the opposite of what Chip and Danny are saying. I think like
wait. Oh, but I wasn't saying the trend is going to change. I was saying we read too much into the trend as determining national champions, determining teams that get to the playoff. Like that byline helps them tremendously, and it is a fact, and I don't think it changes. But because Vanderbilt gets a player drafted doesn't mean their schedule's a gauntlet. Like that's the thing that bothers me is, it's the toughest. Like you look at the Texas A&M schedule next year is not that bad. Like, yeah, they got to play Bama, which is brutal. Like, but that's the storyline of, we have all these players drafted. We're the toughest conference. It helps them tremendously in a sport where perception matters. And rankings matter. Preseason rankings matter. So I don't think it changes. I think the SEC's run will continue. And I don't think, I think you could maybe cut into it a little bit, but I don't think you'll ever, I think the SEC will have the most players drafted, for the next 10 years, 15 years.
Yeah.
Forever.
But I think to further go into this, this was a number from Peter Burns, who was just clearly trying to troll.
I set him off too. I'm sure he's out at me.
This was nothing but a troll tweet, but there is something to it that I think you can't ignore. It was draft picks faced by college football teams during the regular season last year. Georgia faced 43, Alabama faced 42, A&M faced 41, Clemson 34, Notre Dame 32, Oklahoma 17, Cincinnati 13, Ohio State 9.
How many games did Ohio State play?
Was this the regular season? Yes. Yeah. So that impacts it.
But if you do it by game, so that's 4.3 per game for Georgia. If you divide Ohio State's 9 games by 6, that's 1.5. It's still nearly 3 times as many on a rate.
So
this is regular season only or counts the playoffs?
Regular. Last regular season.
Got it.
So my argument was that I just don't see it continue. Like I want to celebrate this particular collection of talent and also suggest that it would blow my mind if we just continue to see it where 66 gets broken in the next year or two, and then it becomes 67, and they just continue to push this out more and more and more. I think that landing somewhere at 63 or 62, that wouldn't be a huge surprise. And I think that maybe the path that you mentioned, Bud, is a little bit more of seeing these other programs that get players who are projected to be top picks and actually providing the kind of environment where they develop into that, where they end up matching some of their projections. So speaking of, go ahead.
Is there one more thing to bring up that kind of goes to the point you and Danny are trying to make that gets kind of lost? Now, there is context of when the players have been taken, but as far as that gap closing, In the last 3 years, because we spent so much time talking about that Alabama 2017 recruiting class and how amazing it was and all that stuff, and it is, because again, all those first rounders.
8
Alabama,
first-round picks from one recruiting class.
Mm-hmm. Alabama has had 28 players selected in the last 3 drafts. Ohio State has had 28 players selected in the last 3 drafts. So if you want to look at it from that angle, when it might not be so much SEC as it could be college football playoff. If we start looking at the draft from playoff schools compared to non-playoff schools,
ooh, that's a great.
I bet you're going to see a big kind of correlation in the trend there.
Tweeting it out right now.
Hey, no, you just got a segment for the radio show tomorrow.
That's exactly.
And
that is problematic. As much as we spend time and we've seen all this marketing from the SEC, which I agree. I think it's genius. And the ACC did count Notre Dame this year, but I saw like the NCAA didn't. And like, if I was Jim Phillips, I'd be on the phone like, hey, those were our guys. We're getting those counted for us this year. They played in the championship game. As much as that's the storyline, I think the more alarming or like under the radar story is the Big 12 not having many.
That's where I wanted to go next. No first round picks for the first time in history. And for the 10th straight year, it is the fewest amount of draft picks of any Power 5 school. The last decade, the Big 12 has provided Heisman Trophy winners, college football playoff representatives in the form of the Oklahoma Sooners, and thrills. I mean, I've really enjoyed watching the Big 12. It has not felt like a bad conference as a whole, just, right off the top, off the surface. But is this reflective of a real talent issue in the Big 12? And is that gonna like change the perception in a way that's like they become the anti-SEC, where if you are, being able to pump up and be able to promote yourself and Danny, like you mentioned, maybe get some of those intangibles and the debate about whose conference is better than the others for the college football playoff purposes. Like, does the Big 12 have a problem right now?
I think so. I mean, if you look at there were 22 players selected from the Big 12 this year. At half of them, or 10 of them, were Oklahoma and Texas. And I think, let me check Oklahoma State here. Oklahoma State had
Chuba, Thailand.
4. So 14 of the 22 players drafted from the Big 12 came from 3 schools. That's a problem. That is, I mean, there's clear lack of parity when it comes to the talent and development at the programs over the long term. Now, that's not to say Baylor hasn't had some. It's not to say Iowa State's not going to have some. They have had some in recent years. It's just every single year when it's the same 2 to 3 programs producing all the talent. And again, Oklahoma had a run of number 1 picks. So, but it's like we mentioned with the SEC, all 14 teams produced. In the Big 10, it wasn't all 14, but it was most of them. In the ACC, it wasn't all of them, but it was most of them. In the Pac-12, it was, I think, I don't know how many schools. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Utah and Washington State did not.
Yeah,
those are 2 that were on the pick list.
So it's like, it's a problem that I don't think you can ignore when 3 of your schools are producing so much of the talent and you don't have that much talent going in. Like if the Big 12's got 45 players selected and 20 of them are from 3 schools, that's fine. When you're only getting 22 players selected and nearly 2/3 of them are from 3 schools, that's not.
All right, I really went into this thinking that I was going to kind of hate on the Big 12, and I will in a second, but I want to defend them briefly.
What a lawyer.
Part of this is oh God, yeah. Part of this I think is cyclical. In that, think about it. West Virginia, newer coaching staff. Baylor, newer coaching staff. Kansas State, newish coaching staff. Kansas is Kansas. Texas Tech, newer coaching staff. So all these teams that you would be hopeful for to produce, somewhere between 1 and 2 draft picks, perhaps, they're all sort of very early in their changeover development cycle. So I can kind of give them a bit of a collective pass. I think, TCU had a decent draft. Iowa State did not have a good draft, but at the same time, they bring back almost everybody that they possibly can bring back. Like they're one of the tops in the nation in terms of returning experience. So that kind of makes sense as to why they didn't have a lot of guys drafted, because basically everybody's coming back. Now you can argue, yeah, bud, that's because they didn't have anybody with first round grades. And I'll buy that. But still, I bet you they have a decent number of third, fourth, fifth rounders on that team when they do decide to declare. The issue here is largely, over the last couple of years at least, Texas, right? There's only 2 teams in this league that recruit at a high level. Everybody else is hoping to have a top 25 type class. There's only 2 teams that really threaten top 10, top 5 status, and that's Oklahoma and Texas. Oklahoma was a pretty young team this last year. I think they'll have a lot of draft picks in next year's draft. Just look at some of these early mocks. I mean, there's a lot of Oklahoma guys on there. Texas has been by far the biggest underachiever relative to its recruiting rankings over the last 15 years or so. And if they get that figured out, the league looks a hell of a lot better. If they don't, then the league will continue to lag.
Do you have confidence that Sark and that staff are going to be able to create a little bit of a better conversion rate?
I would probably buy Texas if I could right now and buy the Big 12 as a whole, not to catch the other leagues, but to close the gap between them and the Pac-12 somewhat. I think he'll be able to do a good job there. But then again, I thought Tom Herman would do a good job there, and that didn't work out. So,
see, part of the concern for me, though, if I'm the Big 12 is Oklahoma and Texas are the only 2 that really recruit at a level where it's you're spitting out draft picks, whether you do anything with them or not. The players are just that good at that point. It's kind of like Michigan right now hasn't been winning a ton of games, but they're still churning out plenty of NFL draft picks because they're getting a ton of talented players. But when you look at the rest of the Big Ten, there's a lot of schools in the Big Ten that don't really recruit to the same level as Texas or Oklahoma. They're kind of recruiting at a similar level to Big 12, but they're churning out draft picks because they are developing the players. Like Iowa. Iowa doesn't recruit wonderfully. It's recruited better in recent years, but its draft pick to recruiting ranking is probably, above average. I think Wisconsin recruiting ranking to draft picks produced is probably above average. The Big 12, and maybe this is what Iowa State's becoming. And maybe to your point, Bud, because there has been some coaching turnover there lately that nobody's really been able to get that established. But the Big 12 doesn't really have that program yet. And other Power 5 conferences have multiple versions of them.
Coming up on the other side, we take a look at some of the interesting college angles to day 3 and turn the page with some very, very, very way too early 2022 thoughts, guesses, predictions, and more next. Okay. So I was, watching things unfold and there was a lot of names where you're like, man, he hasn't been drafted yet. He hasn't been drafted yet. I thought this is one of my favorite players. And it kind of felt like all at once, the entire NFL, I don't know whether on day 3, some guys just don't show up, you delegate something, but it's like all the college football fans in these war rooms, I think they finally got hiring, firing power in the 5th round. Okay. The 5th round is really where I felt like I was like, this is where the college football stars show up. Brevin Jordan going at 147 to the Houston Texans. Kenneth Gainwell, who, was one of the most explosive all-purpose backs in all of college football, goes at 150 to the Philadelphia Eagles. Caden Stearns, a little bit of injury issues, never quite never quite lived up to the way that he flashed at Texas. You look at Isaiah Loudermilk from Wisconsin, Davion Nixon, one of the best defensive players in the entire country last year from Iowa. He goes to the Panthers. Shaun Wade, who going into the college football season, we might have guessed would have been in that conversation for first round or at least being in one of the top cornerbacks. He goes in the 5th round. You take it down just a little bit farther. You got Richard LeCount down there, Dalen Hayes from Notre Dame. It was fine. KJ Britt from Auburn.
Did you see who the last pick of the 5th round was?
Last pick of the 5th round, Ben Mason, a fullback from Michigan.
Yep.
Yeah. I wouldn't consider him on my list. He didn't make my list of college football stars who finally went off the board, but Shamar John Charles, the linebacker from App State,
the multiple time low man trophy winner, Chip. Come on.
Listen, come on. So I guess the ones that stood out from that, Davion Nixon was not a highly recruited player. He worked his way and sort of finally turned in that star performance during the 2020 season. But Richard LeCount and Shaun Wade are both part of the recruiting class of 2017, which had, let's see, Josh Kando went a little bit late. Dylan Moses was not even drafted. Trey Smith went late. Wade went late. Jacoby Stevens went late. And Richard LeCount went late. What do we have to be able to, there's injury issues for Dylan Moses. Like, how do you explain away, or did the NFL make some mistakes with some of these players that were highly recruited stars at the college level, slipping all the way down to the 5th round?
My theory, and I think with Moses, a lot of it was injury, but my theory is these are really talented football players, right? They were really highly rated recruits. Who are the type of players who would benefit from a combine?
Athletically gifted players
that maybe didn't have the greatest tape or the greatest production at times. It kind of hurts their stock, especially when you're looking for like the upside kind of plays. I think if there had been a combine, these guys probably go earlier, because most of them probably would have tested a lot better, and it would have alleviated possibly some concerns that you see on tape. Because, like, let's be real, like coaches, evaluators, when you see that stuff, it can cloud your judgment. Like, you see a guy run a 4.4, then you go watching the tape and he's making mistakes. Like, yeah, but he's got 4.4. Or I saw him do this. I saw him do that in these drills. So you believe there's more of a chance that it could work. Whereas if you're not seeing any of that, there's not as many pluses in the columns for when you're evaluating based on that. So I think that definitely hurt.
The stats from college don't count. I mean, like, you can't take them with you. It's all about projection. That's all these NFL teams care about, is what do they think you'll do at the next level. I think as we start to see more data science used in football, like it's being used in baseball and basketball, that they will continue to draft attributes and talents as opposed to production, because they think they can coach that up the same way that colleges do it, right? I mean, Christian Barmore was a basketball player until his senior year of high school. He went to Bama. It's not like Kansas State taking a shot on this kid. I mean, Bama's like, yeah, you know what? You don't really know how to play football yet. We don't care. We see your height, weight, speed, your agility. I think we're only going to go more in that direction, where they care about your measurables and your attributes. I mean, we're seeing this in baseball. You get pitchers that have, ERAs of 6 signed to $20 and $30 million deals because they spin the ball well, and the new team wants to utilize their curveball and have them throw it 80% of the time. Like, use players in a different way. So I think we'll continue to see college production matter less.
I think it's really hard to play in the NFL. I think that's where you're realizing, like, there's only 259 players drafted, and there's no guarantees. They don't care how many stars you had coming out of high school. They don't care if you had a great season and you might have been a player of the year for your conference. They don't care about anything you've achieved in college. It's hard. It's an exclusive group. And that's what I think when I see some of these players that don't get drafted or get drafted way later than we thought they were, because you heard some analyst on whatever channel you're watching the games on rave about them. And I find myself, I look back on some players and I think it's kind of lazy narrative to say this guy's going to be playing on Sunday one day. And we all say that after a player makes a big play. And guess who else hears it? That player, his family. So you get real excited about it. Then everyone hears it. You start writing about it. Oh, he's going to be playing on Sunday. And it's way harder than just saying he's going to play on Sunday because he made a couple plays in a big game on national television. It's just hard.
I think that this is where I enjoy not having too much of a professional or even really a personal obligation or tie to the NFL side of it, because it allows me to just be angry. Because Bud, you're right. You are 100% right. But I get to stand here and say college should matter. Like, being able to show what you can do in pads, in competition against high level competition, that should matter. If you are playing in the Big Ten and you are doing your job and you're showing out and popping, and I'm watching the game, I'm like, man, that's one of the best players on the field right now, then that should be something that should be taken into consideration. But if as the science, data science continues, and if they continue to look for attributes and talent, then a lot of those players that are just down and dirty, have done it for 38 games in a row and playing at a high level. I respect, I value that. And I would likely get fired, I guess, after about 3 years as an NFL general manager, because
you would have had Sam Ellinger going number 3 overall, and you would have had Trey Lance drafted in the 6th round.
you would have seen a team that is just made up of all Americans that is going like 7-9 every single season in the NFL.
Yeah,
By the way,
who's your quarterback?
Yeah.
Trend wise, two things I noticed that I think we can kind of take that I think you're going to see mirrored in college football. No defensive tackles taken in the first round.
Yeah.
And did you see how many running backs got picked total? Like we had 2 in the first round, which probably not real smart, but they are good players. How many backs got taken in the top the top 5 rounds?
It wasn't until like the very last day where we started seeing a bunch of backs come off.
Yeah, there was a run on day 3.
Yeah, I mean 9 running backs in the top 5 rounds. The position's de-emphasized. They're not wasting draft capital on it. Yeah, I think it's just more continuing. I had heard some stuff on Twitter. Hey, look, running backs are back this year because we had 2 in the first round, and then it was like somebody just shut off the supply. Like, nope, we're done.
Well, I think too, because like there were a few defensive tackles taken early, and there really weren't many middle linebacker, like classic type middle linebackers taken in this draft. And I'm going to be interested to watch that next year too, because like we talked about before the draft, I felt like the defensive tackle and linebacker positions were kind of a weak class anyway. So I don't know if this is a sign of what's happening or if it was just a reflection of a pretty weak overall class. But going back to like the top recruits and all that kind of stuff, Chip not being drafted, the problem was the Jaguars didn't have more picks. Because going through Urban's first draft, I was there. I feel like I was just reading 24/7 recruiting rankings after a while. It was nothing but former 4 and 5 stars.
I mean, he has admitted on 24/7 Sports in a video that he checked 24/7 Sports as a head coach, and he was always looking at class rankings. And he said it at the time because he said he was so competitive that if you're going to say that there's a number 1, we want to be number 1. But yeah, he's very familiar with the top of the player rankings for sure. I bet you Urban Meyer's run the class calculator. I mean, I bet he has.
For sure.
Or he's had Mark Pantoni do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll add him in the class. What does it say now? Where are we? Are we close to Bama? All right. Before we get to the 2022 look ahead, what were some of the other notes, standouts, college or otherwise? I mean, everybody here is a informed football fan at all levels, except for me, who apparently is a traditionalist and hates the way the NFL is going.
I was on Thursday night. I was on here kind of bitching about the Lions draft because I didn't I love Penei Sewell, but I thought it was foolish of them to take him over like a quarterback that was there when I feel like that's kind of where they need to go. And then I wasn't really a big fan of like their first 3 picks because it was kind of, like their coach, Dan Campbell, was the biting kneecaps, and his first 3 picks are an offensive tackle and 2 defensive tackles. And like you said, Bud, this was a draft where there weren't a lot of defensive tackles taken. So from the process part, I wasn't very thrilled. From a personal preference of player, I loved the Lions draft. There's nobody on their board that they took that I did not like, that I didn't have like I had worked up kind of my own sleepers list. Obviously, Penei Sewell's not on there, and Levi Onwuzurike wasn't on there, but Aleem McNeil, Ifeatu Melifonwu, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Derek Barnes, Jamar Jefferson. They're probably your favorite draft too, because I'm sure these are all names that you know and love. So I loved their draft just as a college football fan and then just as an evaluator of talent.
I thought for me, one of the trends and storylines, and it's kind of, I feel this every single year, but this year, because of, I was curious to know if opting out or opting in would impact the draft. And I think one thing kind of resonated. If you want to opt out, you better be a good football player. And if you are, it won't hurt you. But and then I kind of go to like who made mistakes, who didn't. And there's one player that stood out to me that made a massive miscalculation, whoever told him. And if it was truly for COVID, then discount, this doesn't apply. But Jamie Newman not playing at Georgia this season, I think, and I was wrong. I didn't think it would cost him this much. He did not get drafted. At the time, I was like, he's probably going to fall to the 5th or 6th round. And him, I think if he could have played, I think who knows how it would have unfolded, but we saw what JT Daniels got in there and all of a sudden the offense exploded. Now we're like a little teaser of what we're going to do towards next year's mock draft. JT Daniels is already at the top of a lot of people's boards based on 4 games. Like if Jamie Newman would have just played decent at Georgia, I think he would have put up big numbers, and I think he would have been drafted a lot higher than not getting drafted.
I mean, he literally went from like being a top 10 pick in the too early 2021 NFL mock drafts to not drafted at all. And I would wager that doesn't happen very often.
Former teammate Sage Serrat also did not end up getting drafted. I thought that was a surprise. At the top of my, we mentioned Dylan. Chaz did. Chaz went what, second, third round?
Yeah, he went high.
He was a night 2 pick. Darius Stills, the defensive tackle from West Virginia. I thought that one was a surprise to see him fall. He was another player that I thought very, very highly of. Marvin Wilson, Drake Jackson. I mean, just some Trevon Grimes. There were some names on the Chip Patterson. I'm obsessed with college football, and that I just, I did not expect to see them. Like, wasn't necessarily considering a first round, but to make it all the way through, even the compensatory picks, even the 5th round when the college football fans got to take over the war rooms, like to have all those picks come by and not have those names, I found it to be a big surprise.
Yeah, you guys.
I'm sorry. I was really surprised about Stills not being drafted too, but I do at least think he ended up in a good situation in Vegas where he's very likely to make that roster.
This year's a mess because COVID, it's hard even to keep track of underclassmen versus, who has eligibility left. But in a normal year, we always see players make a mistake of leaving for the draft and they go undrafted. Do you feel like that needs to be addressed, or are you just like, hey, tough luck? Because there's a part of me that wishes they could go back or have some eligibility left because they're given a lot of bad advice, from agents, from family members, and sometimes they're in financial hardships where they have to go pro, and either they were told they were going to be a first rounder and they go in the 4th round, or they told they were going to be a 3rd rounder and they don't get drafted. Is it a problem that needs to be addressed, or is it not that big of a deal? Because I think at baseball lets them get drafted. If they get drafted, they like it, they go. If not, they can still play.
The issue with baseball is that the signing period is, Danny, as you know, like it's different. Like here, the draft occurs after the signing period. You have big time, roster limits. You'd have to basically allow them to come back and then go to like any school that has space for them. I also think that the number of players who declare and go undrafted who actually could go back or would be welcome back is lower than we realize, or would want to go back. A lot of these guys are, I'm not saying they love going undrafted, but like it's much better for them and their families to go ahead and start the clock on their NFL careers. The practice squad guys actually make really good money compared to a lot of the jobs some of these dudes get, especially a lot of these guys who, and I've had coaches tell me this, we just ran out of classes they could pass, right? Like there is a certain subset of players in college football who academically cannot handle the coursework once you get past year 2 or 3 in school. And it's a sad reality of our educational system, blah, 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 but they're not eligible to come back. Now the school is not going to announce that, hey, this kid's off the team because he has a 1.7 now, but he has to declare for the draft. There's been players that we all know that had, like Danny from Florida State, certain guys we know on that 13 team. People are like, why did he go early? He got undrafted. I'm like, guys, he was failing out. He didn't have an option to come back. So I think the problem is mostly overblown. You got a couple guys that make silly decisions, but I think on the flip side of this, I am 100% out on the idea these guys get first round grades and come back to school. Like for every Andrew Luck, there's 4 or 5 Marvin Wilsons that I just call BS on the idea that they got first round grade. I never bought it.
So
if you have a real first round grade, you don't come back to school, period. Unless you're like a quarterback whose dad is like super rich and is the commissioner, of a conference or something like that.
So
like
you're saying they got bad advice, like they got a bad grade from somewhere.
I don't know. What I'm saying is I don't think that Marvin Wilson was really a first rounder after last year and all of a sudden went undrafted. If he had first round type film in 2019, they would overlook his bad 2020 and still take a flyer on him. I just, all these schools put out these nice, feel good pieces. Oh, this guy got a first round grade, but he came back to school. BS. Come on. I am buying. Okay.
I'm part of the problem there. I repeat that a lot when we're talking about some of these players, especially in the off season. We say, he could he could have been a first round, or like first 2 days of the NFL draft type guy, but he decides to come back, and then I proceed into whatever else is cool.
I'd buy that. I mean, like, first 2 days, but like first round grade came back.
What happened to, do you have any insight on Marvin? Because I follow him on Instagram, and this is one of the most heartbreaking things. And I know he wasn't the only one that was doing this, but I'm watching him on Instagram. I follow him, and I see him in the lead up to the draft. He's working out. He's getting excited. Day one comes. He's like, life about to change, and he's like, has a few people over, and they're excited. Can't wait to see where I go. Day two, same kind of thing. Stay positive. Gonna go. Here's my job. Goes by. Like, it's painful to watch. These guys have their expectations up here, and it comes in here. And he was still excited about getting the opportunity. I'm going to prove everybody wrong. But I was shocked at the drop. Like, you go from, like second and third round potential to out of it. Was there more to it, do you think? I'm curious to know if what he calling out Mike Norvell, and that was something that was a national storyline, if that possibly hurt him, even though what he did probably was the right thing to do.
I think if you're an NFL team, you don't care about all the other feel goodness, right? And hey, this guy's doing the socially conscious thing. You really don't care about that. You do care that he wasn't in shape to start the year. He got pushed around by Georgia Tech and a little bit by Jacksonville State, and was not an impact player this year, and really didn't stand out even on a really bad defense. But that they totally overlooked what he did in 2019, which I thought was a pretty nice year for him. Danny, you may have a point there. Like, NFL teams may not see that as a positive.
At the very least, he did get 192 guaranteed.
Yeah,
grand from Cleveland. So that's a nice.
It's a big chunk.
I'd still rather be drafted, but for UDFA, that kind of tells you how at least Cleveland feels about his talent.
And
with
I think
Grimes, I think it's just the route running. He's kind of a one-trick guy. Same with Mari and Terry, kind of.
I think that for the UDFA and like whether you should come back, I was going to say Danny, isn't even a fourth round pick probably not guaranteed a roster spot? Like, you still got to go out there and battle with the undrafted free agents, and
you have the edge
out there.
You have the edge over the undrafted free agent, but it's not going to, if it's even, they'll keep you because they have invested in you, but it doesn't guarantee you anything.
Did you guys see that Bama just took Jamison Williams, the Ohio State transfer at receiver?
Mm-hmm.
Just now?
Yeah.
There'd been some hope that he was coming to Champaign. And then as soon as I saw Alabama was interested, it's like, well, there goes that hope.
All right. As we turn the page and look ahead to 2022, it's very interesting because there's going to be, I think at the top, we're going to have some names of players who, like a Trevor Lawrence. I think that from the moment they started playing college football as a freshman, we were like, wow, that guy could be in the NFL draft. Derek Stingley Jr., like as a freshman, like, wow, okay, that guy looks like he's ready to be drafted. Sam Howell, I don't know if we thought of him right out the gates as that kind of player. Kayvon Thibodeau, another one who I think is right up there. Spencer Rattler and JT Daniels, maybe not on first impression anybody's thought that they would be in competition for the number one pick. We mentioned Keaton Slovis on there as well.
Shoot,
I think
Tom
you got to
doesn't
look
even
at
have Spencer Rattler starting after week 5.
Man, it's Caleb Williams show, baby.
What do we think? So what do we think about the group? Because, obviously there's going to be some that are going to be common sense that are going to remain up in the top 10 from now all the way through the next 12 months. But there's also probably going to be a Jamie Newman in there that right now we're sitting at him and looking like a top 10, top 15 pick that will not end up in that position. What do you think the upcoming class is looking like?
I mean, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No, you go.
There's a couple guys that I'm like really sure will go first round because I think they would have been first rounders if they had come out this year, if they were eligible. I have a really hard time not seeing Kayvon Thibodeau be like a top 5 guy. He's the only one that really gave Elijah Vera Tucker any trouble at USC and really stood out kind of above and beyond everybody else in the Pac-12. He continues to get better, was a no-doubter 5-star for us. And I think Derek Stingley, based on the ball skills, the measurables, what he showed in 19, and the fact that I don't think he was as bad as people thought he was in 20, playing through some injury stuff. I'm not sold on these quarterbacks, but they'll get pushed up and go because that's what the NFL does. Because if you don't have a QB, you can't play. So
Were you sold on Zach Wilson a year ago?
no, hell no.
Right. I mean, this is what's nuts.
I'm still not sold on him.
I'm not either.
But he could turn out well. I just, we addressed the crazy dip in competition he had this year, which corresponded to his numbers all of a sudden looking great.
Calling my shot here. There have been it's been 4 years in a row, and then like the 3 years before that. It hasn't been since 2017 since the first pick of the draft was a non-QB. 2022's first pick of the draft will be a non-QB.
Would it be Thibodeau?
What about a defensive guy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be Thibodeau or one of the defensive like edge rusher types, or maybe an offensive tackle, though I don't know who that would be just yet. It's just when I look at this QB class, and again, the concern here is that somebody either blows up and comes on the scene and then gets pumped up to number one, and the value of the position, it's usually going to be the number one pick. It's just like going into last year, tank for Trevor. The year before, tank for Tua, tank for this guy, tank for that guy. Who's the tank for guy? Nobody's out here saying tank for Sam Howell. He's a good player. He's a good prospect. Nobody's out here saying tank for Kadon Slovis. Nobody's saying tank for Spencer Rattler. There really isn't a guy who, whether they end up as the number one pick or not, is still a first round pick. I don't know who that guy is in the next class, which is why I thought like another part of the reason I thought with the Lions with that Penei Sewell pick, I felt like if you were going to take a QB, you were much better off taking one this year than you are next year.
So you're saying it's tank for trade assets. All we're tanking for is for the ability to have some leverage and to have something that we can trade down or trade out of for somebody who gets panicky and falls in love with the quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
The Ekwonu guy, the offensive lineman for NC State, who blew everybody up he faced. I looked and I didn't see any of these mock drafts so far have him, which makes me a little bit suspect of some of these two, or like they're suspect anyway, but like, I think that guy's gonna be a first rounder. You got what?
7th overall. I got him in one of these.
Which one is
mock draft? This is Bleacher Report. I don't know if we're sending people the wrong way, but I don't. Sorry,
they'll get there via the app anyway.
So we should bleep it. That'd be hilarious if we did.
Hit up Ryan Wilson on Twitter and ask him where that 2022 mock draft.
Yeah. But here's what's crazy.
Up to lazy,
right? Here's what I think is funny: is Spencer Rattler, number one overall, like. Maybe Sam Howell, like a top 10 pick. Then it has two other quarterbacks taken in the first round. And while I would laugh at them now, the history would tell you're crazy to laugh at anybody because anything is possible with some of the rises that we've seen. Desmond Ridder and Malik Willis as two other first round quarterbacks. And I would say, are you crazy? I'm not either, but nothing would surprise me.
Yeah, but I've also seen some where it's like Tyler Shuck. It's like that's.
Do they know he transferred yet?
It's like there's plenty of good quarterbacks that are going to be in the draft. It's just I don't feel like there are any kind of quarterbacks in this upcoming class.
Neither was Joe Burrow. No one saw that coming.
No, we felt the same way. Still Tua in that class, though. You know what I mean? There was that guy.
That's true.
When JT Daniels
Spencer Rattler.
Sorry, go ahead.
Spencer Rattler would probably be that guy based off of 1 year, but it's not a slam dunk. In 2 years, he might be that guy.
Again, not even the best QB on his own team, bro.
I mean, look, what we're saying now is exactly what we were saying when these guys were recruits. When JT Daniels took and reclassified into the Lawrence Fields year to jump up a year, we were like, oh man, nobody really is like a number one overall type player here in this recruiting class. Whereas the prior year we had Justin and Trevor, and then JT jumped in, and a bunch of other really good guys. I think Sam Howell is going to be one of these classic. We love him because we're fans of the college game. He's super productive. He's a tough kid. The NFL is going to get him, and they're going to be like, ooh, measurables, ooh, body, like that. Those kind of questions are going to crop up, and we're going to have to see which team. He reminds me a little bit of like Baker, Johnny Manziel type QB, but. DeMarvin Leal is one I'm really confident will go like highly. You got to think at least one of the Ohio State guys gives a first round grade. Probably Garrett Wilson, I would guess, over Olave.
Oh, yeah. They might both go in the first round, but I think Garrett Wilson is going to be like the top 10 receiver.
Zach Harrison is the question mark, because if he looks super, super dominant, then he could be a first round pick. But if he's not even the best edge rusher on that Ohio State line next year, then I don't know.
You think of Tyreek Smith?
Maybe.
Kyrie Elam too. I think is one who is not gonna say he's a lock, but you have the NFL pedigree with his uncle and his dad Abe. You know, his uncle is Matt Elam, the guy who played for Florida. He's always had good technique. Really, really hard worker. Like does the little drills where they're not filming for the one-on-ones, does those just as hard as he does the other drills. And he's also 6'2" as a corner. So I feel fairly good about that one.
I think defensive side too, I with the way the position is changing and what teams are valuing, I think Notre Dame's Kyle Hamilton's probably a pretty safe first round pick next year too, barring injury. Agree.
But it'll be interesting. I mean, you mentioned DeMarvin Leal there, but I'm curious about the defensive tackle, the middle linebacker. It's as though we really are more concerned about the edge. Like we've given up on the middle. We're like, okay, let's get everything get everything locked down on the perimeter, and then funnel everything to the middle. The value on having those really dynamic players at middle linebacker and interior defensive line just didn't seem to show up, at least in the NFL draft. Again, I feel confident about Leal, but the rest of that position will definitely be something I'll be curious to see how it evolves. All right, coming up the rest of the week, there will be a new CBS Sports post-spring top 25 released on cbssports.com. And so on Wednesday's show, we are going to break that down with some discussion. I've got to leave this podcast and work on my ballot. I got to start shifting teams around. And so we'll have maybe some discussion of our own ballots, as well as the overall outlook of the top 25, how things may have changed, and sort of just, what the tiers are looking like when it comes to ranking the top teams in the sport. At the end of the week, we will have the mailbag. So if you want to jump in with a question for the big old bag of mail, of course, anything goes. But maybe if you've got a particular prospect, a particular player, somebody from this NFL draft that you'd like to maybe pick our brains on, feel free to drop that in there, and we will be sure to hit that at the end of the week. You can follow him on Twitter at BudElliott3. You can follow him at Danny Cannell. You can follow him at Tom Fernelli. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you, Chip. Have a great day.